Welcome back to another episode of Miller's Movers. Going to do a slightly different running order this week because there was so much good information and good racing to come out of Leopardstown, the Dublin Racing Festival this weekend. I thought it was only right that we gave it its just desserts and really took a good look at what we learned, what we saw, and some of the fantastic performances we got to witness. Started as it meant to go on really on the Saturday final demand in the 2 mile 6 furlong Nathaniel Lacey novice hurdle of grade 1. He was really impressive, very powerful looking horse, jumped well, travelled well, quickened up smartly, not that he particularly needed to because he was well on top from some way out. This horse has got shades of Denman for me. He's just a big, powerful horse. He looks like he'll make up into a fine chaser, providing his jumping passes that test. And he could go any way in distance. He could step up to the 3 miles of the Albert Bartlett or drop back to the 2 mile 4-5 of the Turner's novice hurdle. That's where they appear to be leaning towards. Willie Mullins said afterwards that he didn't entertain going up in trip with him. That, I think, is a nod to how much class he thinks this horse has got. I think that the Turners was looking fairly competitive. The new line has certainly looked smart when winning the Challow hurdle, but I think this horse, Final Demand, is a slightly different kettle of fish. I think he's going to take all the beating here. We know that Willie Mullins has got a great record in the novice hurdles at the Cheltenham Festival. He's been quite late to discover his hand this year. We're well into February now. Obviously, normally you have a slight hierarchy before now, but I think Final Demand certainly looks like their standout candidate for the Turners, and I think it's going to take an awful lot of beating. Into the juvenile hurdle, normally a Willie Mullins benefit, and his juveniles look weak this year. Willie DeHoo did run a slightly better race, but it went the way of Hello Neighbour. He's quite keen through the early stages of the race. I'm not sure that this form is worth all that much. St. Lucy for Willie Mullins, he was in the Richie first colours. She failed to give her running. She was, again, too keen for the early stages, wasn't able to sustain a run in the closing stages and weakened quite dramatically up the Leopardstown Hill. I think this does look like the Triumph Hurdle is perhaps heading to the UK. Got two outstanding candidates here. Lulamba for Nicky Henderson. He's come from France. He looked really impressive on debut. And East India Doc, who's done really well for James Owen Yard. He's got good flat form. He's looked a natural over hurdles. He'll stay further. I think those two are going to take some whacking. I think Lulamba looks to have the class, but he's perhaps priced up a little bit on potential. East India Doc, we know what he can do. I think those are the two standout candidates for the Triumph Hurdle. And I think it's going to be a year where Ireland, and particularly Willie Mullins, perhaps you go back to the drawing board, they haven't perhaps recruited as well as in years gone past. A French recruit from last year, and indeed last year's winner of the Triumph Hurdle, Majbra, has taken a seamless transition to fences. He's now 2 from 2. He was very impressive on his debut at Fairyhouse, jumped with real elasticity and scope. Perhaps didn't jump as well when winning at Leopardstown on Saturday. He was a bit fiddly on occasion, but it did show another side to his jumping. He's able to link his brain and his feet when he needed to be quick and clever. He got from A to B very efficiently. He's clearly got a huge engine and he powered away up the Leopardstown Hill. He'll certainly give Sagino something to think about come the Arkle. For me, Sagino has perhaps just got that little bit more pace. I think at this trip, Majbra is going to require soft ground to be seen at his best over this trip of 2 miles at Cheltenham. But the Arkle is making up into a really nice race. You've got Lodersud in there as well. He'll give his running. He'll certainly make the front two in the market do their thing. So the Arkle, having been a slightly weak renewal for the last couple of years, is certainly looking pretty strong this year. On to Sunday, and a horse that has perhaps divided opinion a bit this year, having been unanimously loved last year, having won the 2 mile 5 novice hurdle at the Cheltenham Festival. Ballyburn, he's gone over fences this year, hasn't impressed everyone with his jumping. He was a bit scrappy and a bit big on his debut, but I thought he jumped pretty well for a first time out novice. Then went to Kempton over 2 miles, took on Sagino and just got run off his feet. That did impact on his jumping. He could never really find any fluency, and he did make a fairly big mistake at the last. But I thought he was fairly harshly critiqued for that run. I didn't think it was all that bad. It was clearly just a horse that was going a gear too fast to get his brain organised. Stepped up to 2 mile 5 at Leopardstown on Sunday and jumped far better. Again, still a bit ponderous at times, but he's pretty clever and neat. Don't really mind that in a staying chaser, which I think is what this horse is going to be. He's got two options come the Cheltenham Festival. They can drop him back to 2 miles. I don't see that happening, because it looks for all that he'll go to the Browns advisory over 3 miles. Of course, we've lost the Jukebox Man, so that's one big potential rival out of his way. I think he'll jump better again, going a gear slower over 3 miles. He's improving with every single run. He's got the class. We know he acts on the track. And I think Ballyburn looks the standout candidate in the Browns advisory. Yes, the Mullins Yard have got Dancing City in there, but I don't think he's got the class of Ballyburn. And I would be very surprised indeed if Paul Townend got off Ballyburn to ride Dancing City. Having found their Turner's Novice horse on the Saturday, it looks like the Close Sutton Yard found their Supreme Novice candidate on Sunday, with Kopek de Boers absolutely destroying the field in the 2 mile Grade 1 Novice. He was really impressive. He'd looked impressive enough on his debut, despite not jumping well. He clearly demonstrated a big engine. He'd had decent bumper form last year, but on Sunday he put it all together. His jumping was far better. He did jump a bit big. It looked like he'd had fairly extensive schooling and had been taught to get up in the air a little bit, and he certainly jumped a little bit bigger than you'd perhaps like to see in a 2 mile hurdler, but he showed a huge engine again. He pulled right away in the closing stages, didn't need to be put under a huge amount of pressure, and readily pulled 12 lengths clear of the field. It could have been 112 lengths if Paul Townend had ridden him out. This is clearly a horse with a big engine. He's clearly very well regarded, and having put his jumping together, the Mullins Yard, having been slightly scratching around for a Supreme Novice Hurdle candidate, have certainly found one now. It doesn't look like a deep Supreme Novice Hurdle this year, but I think this horse would be a standout candidate in any of the years gone by. I think it's certainly his to lose, and I'll be struggling to find something to oppose him with. Probably the most controversial race of the Dublin Racing Festival weekend was the Dublin Chase on Sunday, the 2 mile Grade 1 Open Chase, won by Solness, who some people perhaps feel stole it again, having done the same at Leopardstown over Christmas. And I can see that angle. He was gifted, or appeared to be gifted, a fairly easy lead. But when you watch it back again, he had to work quite hard. He didn't bounce out from the gate and poach an easy lead straight away. He had to work quite hard across in front of the stands, and it wasn't until he went down the back that he started to open up. And I think this is simply a horse that is at his best when ridden forwards, and horses in behind certainly feel that they were better being kept hold of. Interestingly, I think that Gaelic Warrior had a friend that went to the Dublin Racing Festival. He'd be a pretty good judge of horseflesh, and he messaged me beforehand and said that he thought Gaelic Warrior looked pretty big in the paddock beforehand. They clearly haven't had a clear run with him this year. Whether something came to light after his run at Christmas and he'd missed a little bit of work, I'm not quite sure, but it did look like Paul Townend was keen to try and keep hold of him for as long as possible. Given that Danny Mullins had gone a long way clear, it would have been perhaps more reasonable for Paul Townend to chase him down from further out. I'm not going to completely give up on Gaelic Warrior yet. I do think this horse is far better on soft ground, and you would also have to factor in that Leopardstown has failed to be his track throughout his career. But I don't think we should be dismissing Solness completely out of hand. He's clearly a much better horse on a sounder surface and when ridden aggressively, and they've got every right now to head towards the Champion Chase with realistic expectations of certainly shaking up the principles. I do think his inclusion is going to be a problem for Ile Francais, and I think this is where they want to run Ile Francais. I don't think they've got any intention of going to the Gold Cup. I think they've got no intention of going to the Ryanair. I think the Champion Chase is perhaps where he'll turn up if he runs indeed, and I do think the fact that Solness is prepared to go forward and take him on, you could see Ile Francais sulk a little bit, as he has done in France previously when not being able to get his own way. I don't think it's a big problem for John Bond. This is a horse that requires a strong pace in his races. All it will require is that Nico de Boinville's going to have to judge his fractions right. He's not going to want to chase Solness too hard and soften himself up for a closer, but equally he's not going to want to give him too much rope. So it perhaps will add an extra dimension to Nico's race planning, but I think John Bond shouldn't be put off by the strong pace. He's a strong stayer at this trip. Remember, this is a horse that a year ago they were talking about going up in trip. So I think Solness will perhaps give John Bond a nice lead through the Champion Chase. I think he could spoil Ile Francais' chances. And we also have to point out that Al Fabiolo hit the deck fairly early on in the Dublin Chase. That's a far from ideal prep going into the Cheltenham Festival and certainly going into the Champion Chase. So I think that perhaps one outside lurker, Al Fabiolo, is now not really a viable candidate for the Champion Chase come March. If the Dublin Chase was the most controversial race of the weekend, perhaps the most disappointing race was the Irish Champion Hurdle, which saw Lossiemouth crash out at the fourth last hurdle when upside Stateman yet to really play any questions. They set a fairly nice, level, even gallop throughout. They were drawing a long way clear of the outsiders, and it was all yet to play for. But you just suspect that Lossiemouth, going this 2-mile pace, she jumped a little bit big at Kempton when beaten in the Christmas hurdle behind Constitution Hill. Perhaps is getting taken out of her comfort zone, being asked to go this speed over hurdles because she made a mistake here. She guessed, stepped at the hurdle, came crashing down. We're very fortunate at the Mullins camp that Stateman didn't come down with her, but he managed to find a leg. He was then gifted a very easy task to canter home. They said afterwards that they were more happy with him. They felt that he travelled with more zest than he had when well beaten by Brighter Days Ahead at Christmas. But actually, when you look at the race IQ data and look at the fractions they ran through the early stages, he didn't go an awful lot quicker through the first mile than he had when beaten by Brighter Days Ahead. It was just that she went very hard early on and he was not able to close her down. So it might be that his powers are on the wane a little bit. He's been a really likeable horse throughout his career. He's picked up plenty of grade ones. He's won his champion hurdle in the absence of Constitution Hill. I don't really see him being a viable contender for the champion hurdle in March. And it now just remains to be seen really what they do with the two mares. Far from ideal preparation for Lossiemouth to hit the deck to then head into a champion hurdle, but they seem pretty adamant afterwards that provided she came out of it, that's where they'd go. She'll need some extensive schooling, and you'd like to hope that it's not going to make a jump too big through the early stages of a champion hurdle. And then Brighter Days Ahead, I see that she's shortened up for the mares hurdle, which is perhaps suggesting that that's where they're going to head because they've listened to Mullins saying that Lossiemouth is not going to go there. That would give them a fairly big penalty kick in the mares hurdle. But I do think she would be interesting, setting those hard fractions. I think her form has almost been boosted by what Stateman did this weekend. I think her form from Christmas has been boosted. She would be an interesting addition to the champion hurdle, but I don't think we're going to see her there. I think she will go to the mares hurdle. So for me, it's a hard race to oppose Constitution Hill in. So that's the grade ones covered. Just two from the handicaps that caught my eye potentially going forward into the spring. Pater Merchant ran on the Saturday in the 3-mile handicap hurdle, won by Percival Legalwa. He travelled really nicely through the race, Pater Merchant, closed up on the home bend, and then his run weakened going towards the last, but he's got up just a pound to 131. He's been ridden by conditional jockeys in his last few races. I wonder whether that's a nod to the fact that he might head towards the Martin Pipe, a race that Gordon Elliott loves to win. But dropping back in Trep, I don't think he just simply didn't stay this 3-mile trip. Dropping back in trip, I think Pater Merchant over an intermediate distance is potentially well handicapped off a mark of 131, for all that you have to factor in that he'll probably get a Irish tax added to that if he were to appear at the Cheltenham Festival. And then on the Sunday, Tunsevator, he ran in the 2-mile handicap hurdle. He was settled out the back. He wasn't given a hard time. He met with a bit of trouble of running on the home turn. He was then hampered by the fall of Batman Girac at the last. Again, wasn't hard ridden to finish around about 7th, beaten about 11 lengths. But he's come down £2 now to a mark of 141. He was a winner of the Royal Bond, the Grade 1, earlier in the season. Wouldn't take that form literally when he beat Romeo Coolio because it was a slightly messy race, but it does show that this is a horse with a little bit of class, and there he crucially showed that he had a turn of speed in the closing stages. I think he'd be interesting if he dropped into a county hurdle for Willie Mullins. Of course, there's one glaring race that I've admitted so far, but with good reason, and that was the Irish Gold Cup, won by Galopin Des Champs in really emphatic style. This is a horse that, despite his advancing years, appears to be getting better and better. He beat Factor File more convincingly this time than he had in the Savills Chase. We discussed on the Thursday podcast what Mark Walsh might try and do with Factor File to get close to Galopin Des Champs. We said he would either have to go forward, which I felt would expose his stamina, or settle him more, which Tom felt would make it very hard to pass Galopin Des Champs. In the end, he did choose to settle him, and he did settle better. He jumped soundly. He looked to be closing with quite a nice run on the home bend, but he couldn't sustain that challenge, and Galopin Des Champs was just drawn further and further clear at the line, while Factor File actually weakened and was eventually passed for second and finished third, and a fairly weak third at that, I felt. I, for some time, felt this is not a horse that stays this trip in open company. I don't think he was fully galloping out in the line when he won the Browns Advisory last year, and I'd be really keen to see him drop back in trip. I think Factor File is now going to come back in trip, go to the Ryanair. There's no conceivable way that they think they can beat Galopin Des Champs over an extra quarter of a mile at Cheltenham, given that they've now had 2 bites at him around Leopardstown, which is a track that Factor File acts well on, and they've come up short both times. As for Galopin Des Champs, you cannot pay this horse enough plaudits. He's a simply brilliant 3-mile chaser. Just before we came on to record this, Alex was asking me where I thought he ranked in the sort of last decade or 2 decades of Gold Cup winners and 3-mile chasers. And to my mind, he's the best staying chaser I've seen. He's got bags of pace, as he showed as a younger horse. He's got tremendous scope when jumping. At the second last down the back, he showed tremendous scope to jump that at Leopardstown at the weekend. He's intelligent with his feet. The only mistake he made came in the Turner's Chase when he capsized at the last, when not getting his feet organised. But ever since then, he's been absolutely superb with his jumping. He relishes the job, and his head carriage from the back of the last to the line every single time is absolutely textbook perfect. He gets his head down. He really tries. So for all that he's got bags of ability, he tries hard too. I think he would have more stamina to beat the likes of Corto Star. I think he'd have too much pace for the likes of Denman. And whilst you have to say that Best Mate was a very good horse indeed, going to 3 Gold Cups, he perhaps wasn't in a vintage area. And the one thing I would say is that we now have to cross our fingers and hope that Galopin Des Champs gets to March to defend his Gold Cup crown and go for 3 Gold Cups. But that will be the 5th Cheltenham Festival in a row that Willie Mullins has turned him up for. He won the Martin Pipe, he fell at the Turners. This will be his 3rd Gold Cup. That in itself is a tremendous training achievement to keep a horse fit, healthy, relishing their work. It does, to me, mark Galopin Des Champs out as a standout 3-mile chaser of my generation. So that neatly brings me in to my anti-post play this week. And again, it's a double, and it's Galopin Des Champs for the Cheltenham Gold Cup and Factor File for the Ryanair Chase. Galopin Des Champs, I don't see where the opposition is really in this Gold Cup. I think it's arguably easier than last year. Jerry Colombe, who ran a very fine race in last year's Gold Cup, he's been confirmed as missing the rest of the season. He's not particularly a horse I've ever been a big fan of, but you have to say that he was closing at the line last year in the Gold Cup, a year older, a year stronger. He might have been a realistic challenger. When you go through the runners and riders now, I think this Gold Cup, it looks Galopin Des Champs for the taking. So he's the first part of the double. And then the second part is Factor File in the Ryanair Chase. Yes, of course, there is perhaps the outside chance that they do have one more go at Galopin Des Champs, but I really don't see that happening. I think this horse is tailor-made for the Ryanair Chase. I would expect a Allaho-esque performance if he goes there. Strong galloping. He'll buck out from the gate, go hard, jump well, use his jumping, use his confirmed stamina at the trip, and I think he looks to have outstanding credentials in the Ryanair. So that double with SBK is priced up at 6-1. You'll find the link to that bet in the description below this video, and it will be live until 4 p.m. on Thursday. It's, of course, 18 plus, and terms and conditions do apply. There were also a few potential Cheltenham candidates testing their credentials at Sandown on Saturday in the Scilly Isles Novice Chase. I got this bang wrong, I have to admit. Handstands was the first one off my list. I thought Django Bai was a really interesting horse for Nicky Henderson, and I'm a really big fan of Caliph de Burley. Django Bai ran with really plenty of credit. He closed going to the last, got a good jump, and just couldn't quite find the depths of stamina that Handstands found, and Handstands fended them off. Handstands is not going to go to Cheltenham. The Bryn Pauling Yard said afterwards that they've had a plan from the start of the season which involves missing Cheltenham, where he disappointed last year, and going towards Aintree. This is a horse that is massively on the improve. His jumping was by far and away the best it's been round Sandown. He jumped really well. It's clearly a strong stayer at this trip. He'll stay further in time, and it's certainly an exciting horse. I would just caveat that though by saying that his very best form has come on soft ground, and 5 of his 6 wins have been on soft ground. So as you go into the spring and the ground livens up, yes, they might be able to go up in trip, which will perhaps help him, but I just wonder whether this big actioned horse will be quite at home on good ground. Django Bay, he had an entry in the Arkle and the Browns Advisory. He's now got a mark of 153. There's potentially a chance that he could run in the new novice, or the reinstated novice handicap chase. There's no upper weight limit to that, so he can get in off any rating. It might just be, though, that Nicky Henderson feels off a mark of 153. He might be conceding plenty of weight to potentially more better handicapped horses. So could be Aintree for him as well. I don't think he lost anything in defeat. He perhaps wants a slightly sounder surface to be seen at his best, but his jumping is excellent, and I think he just bumped into an improving horse and perhaps a stronger stayer at this track on that ground on Saturday. The disappointment of the race was Caliph de Burley. Connections had mentioned before the race that they were slightly concerned of the trip. Well, Paul Nicholls had. Harry Cobden appeared to be pretty confident this was a horse that was going to improve for going up in trip. He travelled like much the best horse throughout the race and then stopped turning in away from the pond fence. I'm not convinced that this was simply down to a lack of stamina, because to my mind he stopped fairly abruptly, and horses that don't have stamina, they tend to ebb away quietly. This horse stopped rather dramatically, I thought, having gone through the race very nicely indeed. And you would have to say that's been a little bit the tale of this year so far for Paul Nicholls. A pretty lean January, doesn't look to be improving all that much in February. And you can find a number of horses. I mean, Iope Collonge, for example, at Musselburgh, he went through the race very nicely. Didn't seem to find an awful lot at the back end of the race. There's perhaps just not everything 100% with the health of the Paul Nicholls horses. I'm not convinced that Caliph de Burle lacks the stamina, and I would be concerned now going forwards. They said they're going to miss Cheltenham because the only option there would be the Arkle, and the same owners have already got load of stud for that, so they're going to freshen him up, go to Aintree, go for the 2-mile race there. I'm not sure this horse has got enough pace for 2 miles on good ground. He's starting to look a shade tripless maybe, but for my mind I would be well worth going back over this trip of 2 mile 4 further down the line once Paul Nicholls has got his horses perhaps in a little bit of better form. A slightly shortened version of Handicap Movers and Shakers this week, largely down to the fact that we again lost a load of racing last week. But starting with horses going up in the handicap, and the first one is for Venetia Williams, Joe Lescriba. He's up £6 now to a mark of 102, having won at Chepstow. He previously won at Uttoxeter on a sounder surface. The ground at Chepstow was desperately hard work. He jumped really well. The only mistake he made was at the third last, but he very quickly, having landed slightly awkwardly, got right back on the bridle. That, to me, showed this was a horse that had plenty of petrol left in the tank, and he drew away really nicely in the closing stages. He won off marker 96 at Chepstow. He previously won off a marker 90 at Uttoxeter, so he's going up in fairly big chunks, but I don't think this latest rise of £6 will stop him. Perhaps heavy ground is important to him to be seen at its absolute best, but that's not looking like disappearing anytime soon, so I'm sure Venetia Williams, who's back in a much better vein of form, will find him another winning opportunity before the handicapper fully catches up with him. Finishing behind him on chase debut was the Midwife for Grace Harris. It's gone up £1 to a mark of 86. I thought went quite well through this race at Chepstow for a handicap or chase debut. Settled towards the rear of the field, had to do quite a lot of work to close to Joe Lescriba. Did look like going towards the second last that maybe the Midwife would get on top, but Joe Lescriba found plenty for pressure, drew away again in the closing stages. The Midwife, it's been a shade disappointing, just one win to the name, but does look like chasing might bring about a bit more improvement, up £1 to a mark of 86. I'm sure that Grace Harris will find a winning opportunity for this horse, and is certainly, given that they're very ground versatile, it's got winning form and good soft, cope with this heavy ground at Chepstow. So the Midwife is another horse that I think can be found a winning opportunity for Grace Harris. Probably the most eye-catching runner of the weekend, and certainly the one that I would encourage you the most to put into your tracker, was Joyeux Machin for Dan Skelton, ridden by Harry Atkins, a £7 claimer at Wetherby, in a 2 mile 4 handicap hurdle. Settled towards the rear of the field, didn't look to be hard ridden, and then made very good progress inside the closing stages to run on into third, beaten 3 lengths. It's gone up £1 to a mark of 133. The run caught the eye of plenty, including the stewards, who asked Harry Atkins and stable representative to explain the running and riding of this horse. Harry Atkins said that he met with interference on the homeward turn, and then the horse furthermore hung on his right rein up the home straight, so he had to focus on keeping him straight, wasn't able to fully drive him out. The stable representative confirmed the riding instructions, and it was noted. I do think this looks like a typical Skelton plot job horse. This horse has got form back when with Paul Nolan that suggests he could feasibly be viewed as a 140 rated horse. It's been well campaigned by the Skelton Yard since they took care of him this season. He's run twice at Cheltenham. He ran in a competitive handicap hurdle over 2 miles on his yard debut, finished 12th, was never really cited, and then they ran him in the international hurdle, again a small runner field. He finished 5th of 5, but he was never going to have aspirations to be getting involved there. He's got himself onto a nice handicap mark now. We know the Skeltons like to target the handicaps at the Cheltenham Festival and indeed through the spring, and certainly Joyeux Machin will be on my radar for any handicap he lines up in, particularly if stepping up in trip. He's got confirmed stamina for 3 miles, so the Martin Pipe or the Coral Cup at the Cheltenham Festival would look the most likely targets, but the Skeltons will have their handicap team well worked out, and Joyeux Machin certainly should feature on any shortlist for any of the handicap hurdles at the Cheltenham Festival. Just one horse of interest coming down in the handicap this week, and that's the Nicky Richards trained Florida Dreams, who finished 5th in the Scottish County Hurdle at Musselburgh on Saturday. Was challenging quite wide up the home straight when making an absolute hash of the second last, down on his nose, had to be gathered up. To his testament, he kept on coming. He's got dropped a pound now, down to a mark of 125. He's certainly better than that, and he stays further as well. He was running quite an eye-catching race when 5th in the Greatwood Hurdle at the Cheltenham meeting back in December, and certainly got some good course form. I think if they step him up in trip, he's certainly got a handicap in him off this mark of 125, and he's certainly gone into my notebook as one to follow into the spring. And then to finish with one new entry and one non-mover. The new entry is Volakes for Stuart Edmonds. She ran a really decent race, went 3rd at Chepstow last week. She's a 4-year-old off the flat. Stuart Edmonds does well with these types of horses. She's rated 6-7 on the flat. She's been given an opening mark of 104. And I thought she ran well at Chepstow despite doing an awful lot wrong. She was very keen on heavy ground. She raced quite promptly, didn't always jump fluently, particularly up the home straight. And I really liked her attitude. Every time she made a mistake, she tried really hard to get back on the bridle, kept on coming, got swept past by the winner and the runner-up, both of whom were ridden with more restraint through the early stages. She was by far the best of those that raced prominently throughout. She looks like she'll appreciate a slightly bit of better ground. That might aid her jumping. And I thought a mark of 104, Stuart Edmonds will find a nice opportunity for her, perhaps in mares-only company, in a handicap, on slightly sounder surface as we head into the spring. So for Lakes, she's not a superstar, but I think she's certainly got races off a mark of 104. And finally, one non-mover, and it's the Alan King trained Don't Mind If I Do. He was sent off odds-on favourite at Wincanton last week, but that was on testing ground. I didn't think there was anything in his back form that suggested testing ground would suit him. He's a horse with a fair amount of pace. He's been good on a sound surface, and indeed he was found out by the ground. He was beaten by a Jeremy Scott trained, fairly unexposed type, an Ambient View from Joe Tizzo's yards, who's a good solid yardstick. And Don't Mind If I Do has stayed on a mark of 121. They certainly won't campaign him on slow ground again. He'll be kept now for the spring back onto a sounder surface. On his bumper form where he was behind Regent Stroll, and on his first couple of starts over hurdles where he was second at Warwick behind St Ivers of Ollie Murphy before winning at Wincanton. He's certainly better than this mark of 121, and he's certainly one to keep an eye on in the spring handicaps. The yard won the Scottish champion hurdle last year at Ayr. They might well look to head back there with this horse. If he could get into that race, the quick ground round there on a flat track, left-handed, would certainly suit him, and he's not a horse to be sleeping on. So that's it for another episode of Miller's Movers. A good look at the Dublin Racing Festival, an anti-post double for you, which I'll remind you can find the link for that bet in the description below this video. I'll be back same time again next week, where we'll continue our look at the Cheltenham Festival, which draws ever nearer.